The name sent a cold spasm through Emily. She looked up, and her soulless gaze made Jessica take a step back. There's nothing to talk about. Then, she stood up and walked away, leaving Jessica alone in her confusion, and heard Emily walked alone in the crowded hallways. An island of isolation in a sea of people. She felt lonely. But there was also a twisted sense of power in that solitude. She didn't need anyone. She could get through this on her own. It was a lie she told herself over and over, until it almost became true. Meanwhile, Alex was living in a different kind of hell. His breakdown was not cold and silent. It was chaotic and loud. Emily's accusation echoed relentlessly in his head, tearing apart any coherent thought. The pain and betrayal had exacerbated his forgetfulness to an alarming degree. Forgot to turn in his history homework. He was late for his chemistry test in English class when his name was called. He had completely forgotten which book they were discussing. He stood there, stammering, his face red with shame while the whole class stared. The look of pity from the teacher was worse than the snickers he saw. Emily from a distance. In the hallways, in the cafeteria, across the schoolyard, she was like a ghost. Always there but unreachable. He tried to approach her once. At the end of the second day, he caught her at her locker and summoned all his courage to walk over. "Emily," he started, his voice harsh. She didn't even flinch. She just slowly slammed her locker shut, locked it, and turned to walk in the opposite direction, as if he didn't exist. The cold rejection was more painful than the bitter accusations in the rain. It confirmed his worst fear. To her, he had become invisible. Their lives became a sad dance of avoidance. If Emily took the east hallway, Alex would take the west. If Alex sat at the front of the library, Emily would find a hidden corner in the back. Their houses, once symbols of closeness and safety, now became two separate fortresses. They drew their curtains, avoiding looking at each other's houses. The town also seemed to conspire. In their separation, the Ohio winter enveloped everything in a dreary gray. The bare trees stretched their skeletal branches to the sky like desperate arms. The wind whistled through the empty streets, carrying a bone-chilling cold. Their entire world seemed to have lost its color, leaving only shades of loneliness. The ceiling may have stopped the act of reversal, but its after-effects remained, nurtured by their own misery and separation. Emily, in an effort to protect herself, had become an extreme version of the Alex she once knew. Alex, drowning in despair, had become an exaggerated version of the Emily he once worried about. They had locked themselves into the very traits they had once exchanged. Isolated by the walls they had built, the monster in the room was gone. But now, each of them had to face a monster within themselves. Isolation is a fortress, but it is also a prison. Emily had built her walls so high that no one could get in. But she soon realized that she couldn't get out either. The silence she imposed had become her only companion, and it began to whisper cruel things in the dark. The change began on a Thursday night. Almost a week after their confrontation in the rain, Emily was trying to do her algebra homework, but the numbers danced meaninglessly on the page. Her head was throbbing, and a deep fatigue had been dogging her for days. She rested her head on her desk, closing her eyes for just a second, and then it came. It wasn't like a dream. It was more vivid, more real. She was standing in the backyard of a strange house. Summer, the air was thick with heat, and the buzzing of cicadas. She was young, maybe 8 or 9, and she was staring at a broken swing hanging from a large oak tree branch. 3 older boys were surrounding her. The leader, a kid with red hair and a freckled face, was smirking. "Think you're so smart, Hayes?" the red-haired boy said, his voice mocking. "Always the one raising your hand in class. Always knowing the answer." Emily wanted to say, "My name's not Hayes," but she couldn't speak. Her throat felt constricted. She felt a paralyzing fear, A painfully familiar sense of helplessness. Another, one of the boys shoved her hard on the shoulder, knocking her to the ground. Her knee hit a rock, a sharp pain shooting up her leg. "Let's see how smart you are when you can't breathe," the leader said. And they lunged at her. Emily shot up from her desk, gasping for breath, her heart pounding in her chest. A cold sweat broke out on her forehead. The sharp pain in her knee felt incredibly real, and she instinctively reached down to rub it. What was that? She whispered into the empty room. It wasn't her memory. She had never lived in that house. She didn't know those boys. But the emotions, the fear, the shame, the helplessness were her own. It was etched into her mind, as real as any memory she had ever had. Hayes, the name echoed over the next few days. Fragments of memory continued to surface at the most unexpected times. As she was washing dishes, an image of a torn book being thrown into a mud puddle flashed in her mind. As she was walking to school, she felt the ghost of a punch to the stomach that took her breath away each time. The pain and humiliation washed over her, fresh and devastating. The ceiling had failed. It might have stopped the continuous exchange of personalities, but it hadn't stopped Alex's deepest, most painful memories from seeping into her. Her paranoia began to waver. Her anger began to fade. How could she hate someone when she was feeling their childhood pain so directly? The cold truth she had clung to, that Alex had used her, now seemed foolish and cruel in the face of the terror young Alex had endured. That pain wasn't something someone would intentionally transfer. It was a curse. She couldn't take it anymore. Isolation was no longer a shield. It was a form of torture, forcing her to relive someone else's trauma alone. She had to find him. Another rain began that afternoon. A cold, persistent winter drizzle. Emily didn't care. She put on her jacket and rushed out of the house. She didn't go to his house. She knew he wouldn't be there. He would be somewhere alone. Just like her, she headed towards the town park, a desolate and dreary place at this time of year, and she found him there, sitting on a wet swing, gently rocking back and forth in the rain. He was thinner, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked up as she approached, and there was no surprise on his face, just an endless weariness. They stood facing each other in the rain, silent for a long moment. Apologies seemed too small. Explanations seemed too complicated. "The broken swing," Emily finally said, her voice hoarse. "And those boys?" Alex's eyes widened. A painful understanding crossed his face. You saw it too." Emily nodded, tears beginning to mingle with the raindrops on her cheeks. "I felt it. All of it. That was all that needed to be said." In that moment, the anger and suspicion vanished, replaced by something deeper, more complex. It wasn't complete forgiveness, nor was it restored trust. It was the acknowledgement that they were bound together by something terrible. An invisible thread woven from memory and pain. It was an artificial empathy, born of an unnatural phenomenon. But it was empathy nonetheless. "We can't go on like this," Alex said, his voice trembling from cold and emotion. "Being apart isn't working. It's only making things worse." "I know," Emily whispered. "It's still there. Whatever we did to the room, it's not over." They knew what they had to do. The decision hung in the cold air between them, terrifying but unavoidable. They couldn't run from it. They couldn't ignore it. "We have to go back there," Emily said, speaking both their thoughts. "We have to find out what really happened. Find out what that story on the wall means." Alex looked at her, his eyes tired, but with a new spark of determination. He nodded. Together. That night, they didn't wait. Hesitation only brought pain and separation. With a cold determination, they arranged to meet at the back gate of Millfield High School, just after midnight. The night was thick and moonless, with only the streetlights casting a sickly orange glow on the damp ground. This time felt very different. The fear was still there, a cold knot in their stomachs, but it was overshadowed by a greater sense of urgency. This was no longer a reckless adventure of two curious teenagers. This was a mission. They weren't returning for a thrill, but to find the truth. No matter how terrifying, getting inside was alarmingly easy. As if the school was waiting for them, a window in the gym had been left ajar, and Alex, with his quiet agility, climbed in first and then helped Emily. The hallways were darker and more silent than ever. Their footsteps echoed strangely on the polished linoleum floor. No one said a word. Everything that needed to be said had been said in the rainy park now. There was only action. They reached the door of the locked room. The 4 padlocks were still there, rusted and silent. The symbols they had hastily drawn with chalk to seal it were still faintly visible on the wooden surface, a reminder of their desperate and naive attempt. "It's locked," Emily whispered, her voice barely louder than a breath. "How do we get in?" Alex didn't answer. He simply reached out, his fingers tracing the old wood. He closed his eyes. For a moment, Emily thought he was trying to remember something, but then she realized it wasn't him remembering. It was her. An image flashed in her mind, sharp and clear. A small hand, Alex's hand, fumbling with a loose brick in the wall next to the doorframe. She blinked, and the image was gone. "The brick," she said. "Third one from the bottom, on the right." Alex opened his eyes, looking at her with a mixture of surprise and understanding. He knelt down, using his fingernails to pry at the brick she had indicated. It came loose, and he easily lifted it from the wall, revealing a dark hollow inside. An old iron key rested on a thick layer of dust. "How did you know?" Alex asked, his voice full of awe as he inserted the key into the bottom lock. "I don't know," Emily answered honestly. "I just saw it." The key clicked and the lock sprang open one by one. They unlocked the door that had caused so much pain when the last lock was undone. The door creaked open into a silent darkness. The air inside was freezing, a bone-chilling cold that carried the scent of dust and oblivion. They turned on their flashlights, the trembling beams cutting through the darkness. The room was as empty as they remembered, with the large, dust-covered mirror on the far wall. But one thing was different. The symbols they had drawn on the wall to counter the curse were almost completely gone, leaving only faint, chalky traces. However, the original spiral, the symbol of inversion, seemed darker, bolder, as if it had absorbed the energy from their sealing attempt. As they cautiously stepped inside, something strange happened. The spiral on the wall began to emit a faint glow, a cold, pale blue light. The light spread from it, not like a lamp, but like ink bleeding in water. It spread across the wall, and other symbols they had never seen before, began to form from the light. They were not letters or words. They were images, primitive symbols telling a story. Emily and Alex stood stunned, forgetting to breathe as the story unfolded before them. It began with the image of an adult, probably Principal Thompson, standing between 2 children. One child was surrounded by dark, chaotic scribbles, a clear symbol of pain and trauma. The other child appeared calm, but there was a small crack running down the middle of the figure. Then the spiral appeared, moving from the calm child to the traumatized one. The intention was clear. It was an attempt at healing, an attempt to use one person's stability to mend the other's wounds. Emotional exchange designed to balance young souls. But then, the story turned dark. The spiral began to spin uncontrollably. The light flickered violently. The images of the 2 children began to blur, overlapping, their features merging into a terrifying mess. Small symbols representing personality, a son for extroversion, a book for introversion, began to switch places between the two children. The inversion had begun. The final image was of the adult, his face contorted in horror, hastily drawing complex symbols onto the image of a door, trapping the chaotic spiral. The experiment had failed catastrophically. Me felt tears streaming down her cheeks. It wasn't an evil experiment, it was a misguided attempt at healing that had gone horribly wrong. Desperate act to help suffering children. As the light from the main story faded, Alex suddenly grabbed her arm. "Look," he whispered, his voice trembling in a corner of the wall, separate from the main story. Another small image began to glow. It showed only one of the two children from the experiment, the child with the chaotic scribbles around him. There was no doubt it was Alex, but this image was different. The boy was not a passive victim. He was standing alone in the room. Years later, his hand outstretched, touching the spiral on the wall. He had come back. He had reactivated it himself. The story on the wall was not just about a failed experiment in the past. It was also about a traumatized boy who had unconsciously sought to unload his burden and had accidentally started the horrific cycle all over again. The wall fell silent, its light fading back into darkness. Emily turned to look at Alex. His face was pale in the flashlight beam, his eyes wide with guilt and fear. The final truth had been revealed, not through words, but through the ghostly images on the cursed wall, and Alex's final secret was about to be told. As the last of the ghostly light faded, the darkness flooded the room with a tangible weight, as if it were trying to suffocate them. The silence was even heavier. It was no longer the silence of an empty school, but the silence of an accusation, of a truth laid bare. Emily didn't take her eyes off Alex. The beam from her flashlight trembled in her hand, illuminating his pale face. She didn't need to say anything. The question hung in the cold air between them, sharp as a shard of broken glass. Alex lowered his head, avoiding her gaze. His shoulders slumped under the weight of the coming confession. For weeks, he had carried this secret, a malignant tumor eating away at him from the inside. Now, it had been cut open. "It was me," he finally said, his voice hoarse and broken. "The kid in the drawing. The one with the scribbles. That was me." Emily remained silent, giving him space to continue. She felt a coldness spread through her chest, but it wasn't anger, not yet. It was a terrifying emptiness. "I don't remember much about it," Alex continued, his voice lost in a hazy memory, just fragments. "I remember being very sad. My parents, they were always fighting. And at school, the other kids." He trailed off, but Emily knew the rest of the story. She had lived in that memory. She had felt the shove, the punch, the burning shame. "Principal Thompson thought he could help me. He talked about sharing the burden. I didn't understand, but I agreed. I would have done anything to make the pain go away." He looked up, and in the faint light, Emily could see tears glistening in his eyes. "I don't know who the other kid was. They never let us meet. But I remember the feeling. When the inversion started, for a moment, everything was light. The burden was gone. But then it got bad," he whispered. "It was chaotic. I felt like I was disappearing. I screamed, and then they stopped it. They locked the room. They made me promise never to talk about it again. I tried to forget, but you didn't forget," Emily said, her voice frighteningly steady. "You came back." Alex closed his eyes, a single tear rolling down his cheek. "I didn't mean to." Not consciously. He took a deep, shaky breath. "A few months ago, things got bad again. The teasing, the shoving. It was like when I was little. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I felt like I was drowning. And then I remembered this room. I remembered that feeling of lightness. I snuck into the school. I found the key where I'd hidden it years ago. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I had to come in here. His voice broke in a choked sob. I stood here in this very spot and looked at that spiral. I just wanted someone to understand. I just wanted to share it, just for a little bit. I reached out and touched it. Silence fell again. The confession was complete. Emily felt a chaotic whirlwind of emotions inside her. There was betrayal. He had known about the room, about its danger. From the very beginning, he had let her walk into this blindly, but beneath the betrayal, there was a painful understanding. She knew that desperation. She had felt it. His pain was now hers. He wasn't a monster, was just a hurt boy making a terrible decision in a moment of weakness. You didn't think about what might happen? She asked, her voice softer than she intended. I wasn't thinking at all, he said miserably. I was just feeling. And when nothing happened right away, I thought it hadn't worked. I locked the door and left. I tried to convince myself it was just a bad memory, until I started to change. Emily said. Alex nodded, unable to look at her. I started feeling more talkative, and you started forgetting things. I was so scared. I knew it was my fault. I wanted to tell you, but I couldn't. What was I supposed to do? Say, sorry, Emily. I think I accidentally cursed us with a failed psychological experiment. Despite the gravity of the situation, a bitter smile flickered across Emily's lips. He was right. It was absurd. The truth was out. It was ugly, complicated, and painful. But at least it was now in the light. The accusation had vanished, replaced by a more tragic reality. They were victims of the same tragedy, trapped in a loop created by his past pain and a twist of fate. We can't change what happened, Emily said after a long moment. The silence had been broken. The decision was made, but we have to end it, once and for all. Alex looked up, hope flickering in his tear-filled eyes. How? The wall showed us how Principal Thompson tried to seal it, she said, her flashlight beam sweeping over the complex symbols surrounding the image of a door. He failed, or maybe his seal weakened over time. But we know more than he did. We know how it works. We felt it. She took a deep breath, standing up straight. Fear had given way to determination. We're not going to try to reverse it. We're not going to try to fix it. We're going to erase it. We're going to destroy those symbols and lock this door for good, so no one can ever open it again. It was a desperate plan, formed in the darkness of a cursed room, but it was the only plan they had. Together, they began to map out their next steps, a final plan to seal the monster they had unwittingly unleashed. Asterisk. The determination in Emily's voice echoed in the silent room, cutting through the heavy atmosphere of confession. For a moment, they were no longer two scared teenagers, but two soldiers in an invisible war, facing an enemy only they could see. Hope, however fragile and trembling, had returned. Alex looked at her, the guilt in his eyes gradually being replaced by a glimmer of purpose. He had caused this, and now there was a path, however dangerous, to redemption. Erase them, he repeated, his voice still hoarse. But how? They're not chalk or paint. They're like light trapped in the wall. Emily shone her flashlight on the main spiral. Asterisk. The light seemed to be drawn into it, making the dark lines deeper, more dimensional. Asterisk.